Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Sue-Ann Hong, and I'm the president and CEO for the Center for Asian Pacific American Women. Happy Women's History Month. Thank you for joining us for the kickoff session for the Multicultural Women's Conference. We've built the entire week's program around the theme, Redefining Our Space, Spotlighting Multicultural Women. Redefining our space, meaning how we redefine our success today as we did compared to a year ago. The pandemic has impacted so many people, and the impact is even more exacerbated for women of color. And that includes economic, health and well-being, as well as racism, xenophobia. When we created the women with an X, we intended it to represent our LGBTQ+ community. I was forwarded an hour before the conference an Instagram post by Blair Imani that the letter X in women is misgendering. Transgender, cisgender women are women with an E, and that it's harmful. So intentionally language of making sure that we understand how we're explaining, and that intentionality is exactly what we mean, is very important. So for the conference today, I'm going to share with you what our mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottoms, said about our conference. She said that, first of all, she's the second woman and the second African-American female to be the mayor of Atlanta in the history and who served the position. And she said, we need leaders to believe in equity, diversity, and inclusion and practice it. We need leaders who are willing to bring awareness to issues and challenges across cultures. We need women like you. Everything you need, including the X factor, is already within you. So for the purposes of this conference, the X stands for the X factor within each one of us. So with that, just as Suprita Fetmasi did for me an hour ago, let's engage in dialogue about the challenges we face, and more importantly, discuss what we can do individually and together to support one another. So now, please join me in welcoming the 2021-2022 president of OCA Asian Pacific American Advocates, Linda Ng, who will share her opening remarks. You're on mute, Linda.
Great. Thank you, Sue-Ann. Greetings. My name is Linda Ng, National President of OCA, Asian Pacific American Advocates. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the 2021 Multicultural Women's Conference. We are here to celebrate our diversity, to empower and build stronger connections for all women, no matter what your community or background is. I am so honored to join you and be in the company of so many strong women leaders. OCA is a national nonprofit, membership-driven organization based in Washington, D.C., with over 50 chapters and affiliates across the country. We focus on social justice, immigration, education, and technology policies, as well as civic participation and community building. I am particularly proud of OCA's Women's Initiative program that we host every year at multiple locations around the nation, bringing aspiring leaders and professionals together. The challenges that women face today are unprecedented. With the rise of COVID, many of us are isolated at home, being the primary caregivers of our children and in charge of their education, all the while continuing to work and struggle with the economic uncertainty that the pandemic has created. Now more than ever, we need to build our networks of friends and with other women to discuss issues affecting our health, mental wellness, and financial stability. Not only are we culturally diverse, but we are also diverse across the socio-economic spectrums. We are students, service workers, single mothers, professionals, and executives with different stories, but face common issues because of our sex. There is still gender discrimination, unequal pay, and underrepresentations in the positions of leadership. And for women of color, those challenges can even be greater, facing systemic racism, bullying, discrimination, and hate. We must stand up for our rights now. We need to share, mentor, collaborate, and join in solidarity. We need to work across communities and cultures to learn from each other, to inspire and empower so that we can achieve our full potential. So I look forward to seeing everyone engaged throughout the week. Thank you to our sponsors, honor speakers, and guests for being a part of this forum. Please enjoy the conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda. This is a conference that was created from our hearts. And I think the steering committee, from OCA, and I'm going to give a shout out to the Greater Washington, D.C. chapter, Women's Entrepreneurial Opportunity Project, Alvanza, Boys and Girls Club of America Native Services, and VMT Consulting. And we also thank our community partners, APIA Scholars. You got to be ready for the mocktails and mentoring session. That'll be fantastic for Tuesday and Thursday night, as well as National ACE. And we also would like to thank our corporate sponsors for sponsoring our event, AARP, Comcast, NBC Universal, AT&T, and Walmart. And you'll hear throughout the week various sponsors who are supporting us. And as you also notice, we have American Sign Language service for the conference, which we are very excited about. And again, trying to be more inclusive and to make sure that we have opportunities to include everyone. So to open our first session, please welcome Senator Stephanie Chang from the state of Michigan, who was honored as a Shiro for her work in the community at the 2020 AAPI Women's Conference. Senator Chang.
Thank you so much, Sue Ann, and thank you to the Center for Asian Pacific American Women, OCA, and all the amazing partners for putting on this event and for inviting me to be with you all. And really just truly an honor to be here, and also was an honor to be recognized as a Shiro last year. Doesn't seem like too long ago, but I just really appreciate that recognition and just inviting me to be part of that event as well as this event. So, I think it's really important that we're gathered here today. I think creating spaces for women of color to come together is so important always, but especially right now. And we have seen, as was mentioned earlier, we've seen how women of color are disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. In so many ways, whether it's restaurant workers affected by the closures, those earning a minimum wage not being able to make ends meet, women being forced to or choosing to leave the workforce to take care of the kids. We just have seen so many examples of how women, and especially women of color, are impacted. Sorry, we've got the kids in the background, which I'm sure you all may have your own kids in the background. But speaking of, we know that actually there were 2.2 million fewer women in the labor force in October 2020 compared to October 2019. And we also have seen studies that show that it's going to be until 2024 for women to regain the strides that we've made in workforce participation, which is going to be 2 years behind men. So we want to be able to get back to that pre-pandemic levels, but it's going to take a lot of work and it's going to take policy change. Speaking of juggling kids and work, we've seen that women have really been the ones to deal with virtual learning or homeschooling or childcare for the littlest of our children. And, I've experienced that myself as well. In September when schools resumed, many of them with remote learning, 80% of the 1.1 million people who exited the workforce were women. So we've already seen this impact. We've seen it month after month after month now. And we've seen the impact of COVID-19 over the past year, and what a year it has been on our underserved communities. We see this in the way that communities have been disproportionately impacted by the coronavirus itself, with the death rate, with the case rate. We've seen issues of equity when it comes to testing sites, when it comes to access to the vaccine. And we've also seen it in terms of the many, many Americans and people of color, and especially women of color, being behind on rent and utilities and water. So we've got our work cut out for us, but it's also really important that we continue to address not obviously the policy end of things, but also we've got to do a lot in terms of really just changing our culture and of making sure that we're talking about these issues, talking with one another and supporting one another. So, you know, I think in terms of some of the issues and challenges that we still need to overcome, all of the things I just mentioned, but I think it's also really important to never forget and not be afraid to call out racism, whether it's interpersonal racism or structural or institutional racism, to call it out when it's a coworker who says something. In my case, I've had to do that in the Michigan State Senate, or when it's a company, or when it's a state department or a federal government agency that isn't doing what it needs to do, is to call it out and to make sure that we're constantly striving to do better. On the interpersonal end of things, I think we're all familiar with the fact that last year, since the beginning of the pandemic, there were over 2,800 hate incidents reported to the Stop AAPI Hate Coalition. Those were all hate incidents targeting Asian American community members. And so we know that words matter. We know that the previous president and many others using inappropriate terms helps to inflame much of the hate that's existed. And we know that especially in recent months, we've seen a terrible rise in violence against our Asian American community members, including our most vulnerable elderly residents. So we need to continue to speak out about that and continue to address it. But in addition to that, I think what's really important is that we recognize that many of the issues that women and women of color have faced during this pandemic aren't actually new issues. These are all issues that were going on before and will continue to go on after the pandemic unless we take bold action to address them. And these are all things that, regardless of if you're in the corporate sector or nonprofit or the public sector, we're all familiar with the issues around paid leave, paid sick leave, pay equity, childcare, affordable and quality childcare. This affects so many women, regardless of what level you're at or where you are in our country. These are all issues that predominantly impact women and women of color. So again, we've got to do better. We've got to continue to work hard on all of these things. What can we do to help ourselves and one another during this time? That's a great question that I was asked to help address. You know, I think there's a couple things. One is to do what we do as women, and to check in on others, to check in on our family, to check in on our friends, to not assume that everything's okay, and to ask people, how are you doing? But at the same time, also letting people have their space and knowing that people are going through a lot, whether it's losing family members or friends to COVID, or trying to juggle childcare and work, or whether it's any other number of struggles that people are facing. We've also got to let people have their space. Speaking of letting people have their space, knowing that we're so much in a virtual world right now, just remember that the other people on that Zoom meeting, they may be having their kids in the background. They might be trying to juggle virtual first grade, fourth grade, or something like that with the Zoom meeting that's going on. And so just being understanding and asking how you could help support them. So, we've got a lot of work to do, but I also believe very much in the power of women being organized and the power of women coming together. So that's what I think is so powerful about this week's conference. And I'm so honored to help kick this off. So thank you again, Sue-Ann and others for inviting me to be here. And I hope you have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you so much, Senator Chang. You laid out such a great framework for our first panel, and especially around the theme of overcoming our challenges together and specifically focusing on our commonalities. So with that, think about, as you listen to the conversation, I would like for you to think about two things for the conference. Number one is, what is something you can learn to help yourself? And number two is, what can you do to support another woman or another person? So think about what you can do as you hear throughout the conference, whether you're here for one session or for all of the sessions. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce you to our panel members. First, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Karen Ng, President and CEO of Csmi Engineering, and also the board chair for the National Asian Chamber of Commerce. Karen, welcome.
Good afternoon, good evening, Sue-Ann. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Just going to introduce myself quickly. I'm a business owner of an engineering company in Chicago. My parents started this business, so I am part of a family business. I worked for them for about 5 years, and I had made an agreement that at the end of the 5 years, I wanted to become president, which did happen. And a couple years after that, I purchased the assets from my parents outright. So it is now a 100% woman-owned business. I'm also a wife of 21 years and a mom to a 17-year-old daughter. And as Sue-Ann said, in the community, I chair the board of the National Asian American Chamber of Commerce and Entrepreneurship. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Karen. And I would also like to introduce Ms. Cecilia Nelson, who, by the way, was notified 4 hours prior to our conference because Lisa Price had an emergency. So thank you so much, Cecilia, for stepping in. So please introduce yourself.
Thank you. And I'm going to do my best to do Lisa, who is a dear friend, justice. So I am Cecilia Nelson. I head diversity education at L'Oreal USA. I am proud Afro-Latina, so I'm the first group in my family to be able to go to college and to work in the corporate sphere. And so when we have this conversation about women, I really think about the intersectionality, and I think about the struggles of my grandmother, who came to this country to pursue a career in fashion, and because she was a Black woman, was not able to. So I always think about her, and I take her into every space that I enter. So I am been married to 7 years to my high school sweetheart. Didn't get married after high school. Thank goodness for Facebook. He found me 25 years later, and that is our love story. I am also the mom to a fur baby who you may or may not hear bark. And I am the mom and best friend to an amazing daughter, Atrice, who is 35. So thank you for allowing me to step in and join in this exciting conversation.
Thank you very much. I love the mom and daughter duo for you, both of you, Cecilia and Karen. That's fantastic. All right, next I'd like to introduce you to Ms. Carla Knapp, the National Vice President, Boys Girls Club of America Native Services. Carla?
Thank you, Sue-Ann. So professionally, I'm the National Vice President of Native Services for Boys and Girls Club of America, as Sue-Ann shared. I've been in the movement for 20 years. But personally, I am a multicultural woman. I am Indigenous, a proud member of the Penobscot Indian Nation. I am also a wife to another tribal member from my same tribe. I have 2 children. Are you ready for this? I have a 30-year-old and 11-year-old. So a 30-year-old son and 11-year-old daughter. So that's me professionally and personally.
Amazing. And appreciate Walmart helping connected Carla and I actually through the Leadership Coalition. So thank you for that. All right. And last but not least, Ms. Cindy Benavidez, CEO of the League of United Latin American Citizens, otherwise known as LULAC.
Suan, mil gracias y buenas noches. Good evening to everyone. My name is Cindy Benavidez, and I serve as the Chief Executive Officer for the League of United Latin American Citizens, also known as LULAC. We are the oldest and largest national Latino civil rights organization in the country. We turn 92 years young on February 17th of this year. And, as background, I am the youngest leader leading a national legacy organization in the country. I am unfortunately, a millennial. And simply what that means is that I have a PhD in texting, and I'm better on texting than on emails. I am also an executive and a mom of a 3- and 6-year-old. So oftentimes you will hear my 3-year-old daughter, America, or my 6-year-old Victor stopping in. They are not shy children, and they will introduce themselves. So you might see them later on. Thank you so much, Suan. And also just thank you, Linda and Thu, the senator, and also my dear friend, Rosa Mendoza, for introducing me to this cohort.
Thank you so much. And I may not have a PhD. I don't know what's in between a master's and a PhD in texting, but I think that's what I have. So thank you so much for coming. And we really have a rich conversation we're going to have tonight. And what I want to do is start off just by talking about the framework that Senator Chang laid out for us, and just describe what's the last year been like for you, and how have you pivoted personally and professionally. And I'm going to kick that off with Cindy.
Thank you so much for that question, Suan. And I'll tell you that on the professional front, as COVID-19 was kicking off, I remember we had reached out to the CDC to ask for information in Spanish. And their request at that time, or their response rather, was we don't have the information and we don't know when we're going to have it. So LULAC stepped right in to create something called Ayuda en Español, or help in Spanish. And we were very fortunate that we have corporate partners like Walmart, as well as so many others who stepped in to make sure that a lot of relief was reaching our community. What a lot of people don't know, Suan, is that 5 out of 6 Latinos have to leave their houses every single day to work and get paid. And so I am that 1 in 6 that's very fortunate to be able to work remotely, but I recognize that the majority of my community have to leave their houses to be able to sustain their families, to put food on the table, to be able to pay for bills. And so that's, something that really stands out for me, Suan, is that Latinos, our communities of color, are the essential workers of America and are being hard hit. Something else to note is that as we look at data and statistics, Latinos today are 63 million strong. And in just 30 years and 3 decades, Latinos will be close to 130 million strong. What that means in the context of America is that 1 in 3 Americans will be of Latino ancestry. So as we think of the future of our country, let's make sure that we understand the importance of all communities of color, and understand that there's growth that's going to shape who we are. I would say in the personal context, Suan, it's been quite, I would say, hard to see so many loved members have COVID-19, so many individuals pass away from COVID-19. We're one of the communities that has been hardest hit. And at this point, every single Latino in America knows someone who has had COVID-19 or who has died from COVID-19. And I just want us to understand the gravity of that, and how a lot of social inequities continue to impact communities of color in America. As a civil rights organization, I can tell you this is something that we live, that we breathe every day. I even dream about this at night. And I'm just grateful that even through all the challenges, we are able to look at opportunities and look at what lies ahead to be able to rebuild our country and shape it into a more inclusive community, into a nation where all of us are accepted.
So Cindy, it's just a stark reality when you said 5 out of 6 Latinos are an essential worker. That is unbelievable. And that obviously puts a lot of risk on those individuals who are working on the front lines, and the impact of COVID. So one of the things I wanted to ask Karen was from a lens of small business to entrepreneurship. What are you seeing as far as, how are you pivoting personally? And then what are you seeing from a national ACE perspective?
Sure. Let's do some statistics first. So National ACE and Reimagine Main Street, which is a collective initiative between public-private strategies, the U.S. Black Chamber and the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. We collected all this data from business owners, but specifically for AAPI businesses, 84% of them have been negatively impacted by the pandemic. 44% have decreased the number of people that they employ, and almost 1 in 3 AAPI women business owners have experienced anti-AAPI sentiment because of this pandemic. So those are pretty high statistics, and it's good that we have the data. You know, you ask, how do you know this? And when you do these surveys that cover minority-owned businesses, you can collectively get the accurate statistics to back that up when you're speaking to other corporations and to other communities. But let's talk personally. I guess you're looking for some tips and hints and things and what has worked in this time. So personally, my business, my role was to travel probably 65-70% of the time, which completely stopped. And I didn't think that was that big of an impact because that was my job, but it's a lot of time that I was on the road, and it's a lot of time I kind of got back being at home with my family or with my staff being so close. So I figured this is that time when you say, if I had the time to do it, I would do it. It was the opportunity to do it. So it was a time to come back to some good habits and routines and not use travel as an excuse. So eating better, wasting less food. I started meditating more, working out, going to the closet and wearing clothes I hadn't worn in a long time, because when you're packing for a trip, you pick the stuff that's comfortable and you know you look decent in and stuff like that. And then again, more time with the family. I mean, that was just the opportunity. You could look at it as a thing that is a consequence, but a good opportunity was to spend time with the family. So we got really good at ping pong in our house. From a professional standpoint, I think, you know, pivot is the word of the year, right? So if you didn't pivot, your business didn't do so well. You couldn't do business as normal, and you either had to redo your business model or you make some micro changes, which is what we did. And I think what happened was, because we have such good relationships, and maybe that's a girl thing, or maybe that's something that's important in our office, we ended up listening to everybody, not just our clients, but our suppliers, our staff, our community. And when you have this time and have better communication, we got a lot of things done. And it was just, again, an opportunity, although it was because there was some consequences that went on with that pandemic. So I guess that's kind of what I looked at it towards, of what did we do during that time.
So my sense is that you don't even realize what's happening to probably your body or your psyche if you're traveling that much until you don't, right? So that's huge shift in lifestyle too, absolutely. So how about you, Carla? How do you view the changes and kind of how it's impacted you?
Yeah, so I'll share professionally, personally, and hopefully I can provide some practical tips. But, you know, first, just acknowledging, can you believe March 11th will be 1 year since the World Health Organization declared this a global pandemic? So it's been 1 year. And during that time, professionally, I have been a telecommuter. I work from home. Prior to COVID, though, I worked from home and traveled frequently. And many of our calls prior to COVID were conference calls. Now I'm not traveling and all calls are on Zoom. The work days seem so much longer because we're really trying to support the communities that we serve. So I might start at 6 a.m. and my work day does not end till 6 p.m. because if you're dedicated, compassionate, and committed to your job, I'm all in. But what I have found is that I am having Zoom fatigue. I think many women in the workplace are having Zoom fatigue. Like, you feel like you're on stage every day, you have to show up on camera, and as a leader, I know that I need to model the way. But now personally, you know, you heard me talk about, I have an 11-year-old daughter. that transition to virtual school, not only was I expected to work, I also became a 6th grade teacher. And every parent wants what's best for their children. And I learned really fast. I am not an algebra teacher. At that same time, the state that I lived in, it conducted a mandatory shutdown. So if you were not an essential worker, you were laid off. And guess what happened? I haven't shared this with a lot of people, but my husband was laid off. He was affected by that, and I kept it to myself. I'm a strong Indigenous woman, so I didn't share that personally with anybody. But eventually, their business got permission to open back up. But the state I live in is really a high-risk state, so I basically have stopped all my previous activities. I live where I live, I don't go to the beach, I don't go to the restaurants, I don't go shopping, I avoid crowds, altogether. But what I learned, if I look at this as the glass is half full rather than the glass is half empty, is that during this challenging time in the new normal, we need to really pause and appreciate each other. Like, I appreciate my husband, my daughter, I always have, but I'm just saying, to spend this quality time and be quarantined with them, I actually just love the moments we have together. Now, as a leader, I'm going to share one practical tip. And I heard the word pivot, and I know it was overused. So my practical tip is to maintain agility, be creative, the ability to learn and create, be innovative, be responsive, the ability to switch quickly. I will not say pivot, but the ability to switch quickly, be adaptable, tailor strategically or process to specific circumstances, and be diverse. The ability to consider multiple competing issues, learning to delegate more, and utilizing the strengths of your team. So that's my practical tip, Sue-Ann.
Well, Carla, thank you for sharing. I think when you and I talked about the whole thing about algebra, I thought that was so funny. I'm like, I wonder if she looked up on YouTube how to do algebra. So, but with that, let's talk to Cecilia. Cecilia, tell us about how things are going at L'Oreal, especially with the position that you hold, and how are you managing all of this during the pandemic?
Well, first of all, thank you for asking. And I'm going to start with, I'm not going to say fine. And so anyone who starts a statement with fine, they are not being honest with you or with themselves. So from a work perspective, I refer to multiple pandemics. We're in the, we're coming out of one, which is the climate of the election. That was a definite a crisis. We are still dealing with the health from a COVID perspective. As a result of the murders of innocent Black people, we had what I refer to the racial levees breaking, meaning the systemic racism had poured down and rained and the levees could no longer hold. And so dealing with the aftermath of that and supporting my Asian brothers and sisters from last year, right? So we as a collective society are just now paying attention to what's happening in the Asian community, but I was fully aware of it last year. So I say all that to say, as a woman of color in the space of D&I, one, I've never been so busy and worked so hard in all of my years. Two, as a woman of color, I hold the space for other marginalized groups, which means I have to like the therapist, right? I have to make sure that I take time to put my mask on. I'm really good at giving advice. I'm not so good at taking my own advice. It's all about serving from your saucer and not your cup. So, from a L'Oreal perspective, we've been very, very busy. I am so proud of the work that we have done, both to step up for our employees. So at the beginning of this, when our retail facilities closed, we still paid employees for 2, almost 3 extra months when they weren't working. We stood with Black Lives Matter, and we were very intentional to say Black Lives Matter, so language matters. And we now stand with the Asian community. And every time that we say that we stand, it's not just, you know, an act, it's not just the words, it's an action that's supported by either a philanthropic perspective. And I think that's really important. On the other hand, I love that everyone is speaking about the pivot. And so, not to sound like, you know, a tape recording, I'm not going to use the word pivot. I think for me, what 2020 has taught me is boundaries. And I think that's been really hard. You know, the other participants, I traveled extensively, you know, so if I was traveling to do a facilitation or traveling, that meant I was losing a day because I was traveling. I would be at the event to travel, and then I would lose a day to travel home, or even if I went out and came back in the same day. Now, because of Zoom, I can be in 3 different places. So that means I can have 3 facilitations, panels, speaking. It didn't dawn on me until about a month ago. I'm like, there was no way in the pre-COVID world that I would physically have been doing the amount of work that I am doing. And so boundaries are important. And while I don't have a child at home, I recognize and respect what our colleagues are I'm going through. And we don't have those cues of, hey, it's lunch, everybody is getting up to go to lunch, or hey, it's time to leave. And so we sit in our offices and in our spaces, and then we're like, wait, I haven't eaten for the whole day. I probably haven't stood up as many times as I should. I haven't taken a breath. So boundaries is one thing that I think is really important. And then the other thing is self-care. Self-care as an act of self-preservation is so key. And so that's, you know, the advice that I offer is, if you haven't taken a day off, and I mean a literal day off, not just Saturday or Sunday, take a day off, right? Do what you can do, because it's so important, and you show up better for yourself, for your family, and for your 9 to 5. When you are well rested and mentally better, for lack of a better term.
So one of the things you said, Cecilia, I started to laugh in my mind, because my watch tells me I need to breathe, and that because I need a reminder, right? And then the other thing is, I literally put a total gym next to my desk. So like, if I have 5 minutes, I'll get on that total gym, because I can't, otherwise I'll never get any exercise unless our twin Yorkies, you know, make us go out. So I think these are important things that we have to consider, is what are we doing deliberately to take care of ourselves? So I want to delve a little deeper into the COVID impact of women of color. And Cindy, you said something to me during our prep call that I thought was very compelling. And that's this whole notion about making decision about what needs to be purchased. And is it a choice between milk and something else? And so I wanted to have you share the realities of what you're seeing from your organization. I think this is really important.
Thank you for that question, Sue-Ann. And you know, just to give the background and context, since last February, 2.3 million women have left the labor force. 2.3 million women. 80% of the 346,000 workers who vanished from the labor force in January of this year were women. And when we look at unemployment rates, 8.5% and 8.8% of unemployment rate in the African American and Latina women specifically, compared to 5.5% for white men and 5.1% for Caucasian women. And so what we're seeing is that the shackles of poverty are severely impacting our women of color. And in the relief efforts that we were doing, Sue-Ann, and this was through contributions of so many different partners, some who are actually also supporting this event. What we found in the questions and the comments that we were getting from head of households, many of them women, Latinas, were really striking. And I will tell you that there were many a nights when I could not sleep, thinking about the realities that our communities were facing. And I remember that, you know, in one of the relief efforts, a woman came up to one of our members, and what she shared was a note of gratitude and tears, saying, thank you for helping us with providing flour, tortillas, and beans and cooking oil, because the decision that she had to make that day, Sue-Ann, was if she could buy these basic staples to provide for her family or buy laundry detergent. That's how real COVID-19 is impacting women of color. When mothers have to figure out how they're going to put food on the table versus buy other essential items to keep their families going is a real issue in this very moment. And what we're finding out, Sue-Ann, as we talk to physicians and doctors who work in the emergency rooms, who are working in the clinics, is that what they're getting back from their patients is questions around resources when it comes to food insecurity is number one. Second, financial resources to be able to provide for their families. And third, maybe a comment, typically a negative one, around the vaccine. And aligning with that, you know, what we're seeing is that there is an anti-vaccine effort targeting Spanish dominant Latinos. And what we're finding is that every day our community is getting 2 to 3 videos that are anti-vaccine and that have misinformation every single day. We have already flagged this for Facebook, for Twitter, for Google, because we want to make sure that these companies are tracking the analytics of this misinformation. And what we already had, Sue-Ann, was a community that was suffering because they are insecure, food insecure, financial insecure, housing insecure, unemployment insecure, and then trying to figure out if they can even get into a line to be able to access the vaccine. And everyone knows that there's no cohesive strategy at this moment, that it varies state by state. And if you've tried to sign up, you know, it's different depending on what state you are. In some states, they actually require that you provide a government issue ID. In other states, the form can only be found in English. And guess what? It's all through the web. And so if you're 1 in 3 Latinos, that means that we don't have access to technology or broadband. Then you start thinking about computer literacy and how many of our Latino community is actually computer literate and can access a form online and fill it out in a language that they may not be native. And so what we're seeing, Sue-Ann, is just compounded challenges on top of each other for a community that is trying to survive. We've had cases where mothers have had to leave their children, their smaller children, with their older siblings at home. And now you have an older sibling who's trying to get through middle school or high school, now taking care of the younger ones, one on a smartphone, the other one on a tablet, and potentially maybe there's a laptop in the house, all happening at the same time. So there's no coincidence that there has been a 400% increase in Latino children getting Fs. And as I think of this, I just, my heart goes out to all those individuals that are having to make these hard decisions, who are on top seeing loved ones impacted by COVID-19, or who have had someone who has passed away. And then you add, the elements of, the freezing temperatures and weather inclement in Texas. And you start seeing even additional emergencies, natural disasters happening across the country, Sue-Ann. So I can tell you, as a civil rights organization, I wish I could tell you that we were going out of business. And similar to Cecilia, this has been probably the time where I have worked the hardest, because we know that people's lives are at stake. We know that people are confronting real decisions in real time, and that we have to be there to be able to assist them in whatever way that we can. And sometimes it's literally just being a connector and connecting them to the right information. And so I will tell you, Sue-Ann, that it's been heart-wrenching. I think of all the mental health that so many of us will need, including the families that are directly impacted. And what more can we be doing as a community? What more can we be doing as a nation to make sure that the most vulnerable can be reached?
Cindy, that's so compelling, especially, again, I think the main thing is just what is the reality of, these people that are trying to survive this pandemic, because there's more to it than just, we're frontline workers, there's compounding issues. One of the things that I wanted to ask was, is there something in particular that people can help, our audience can help? What is it that they can do to support you and support your organization? So think about that, and we can always share that information out as well, Cindy, if that would be helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sue-Ann. I mean, like immediately you can, if you don't know, if you're not familiar with LULAC, you can always visit us on our website. And there's multiple campaigns. So, if you're not aware, we have Vacúnate Hoy, which is, get the vaccine today. And this is like a one-stop place with real-time information about the vaccine to specifically combat misinformation. And so if you're a corporation out there and you want to join, this is at no cost. We welcome everyone to join us because we just want to make sure the information is reaching the community.
Absolutely. And there's a whole segment too on COVID-19 and misinformation, disinformation. Those are the very, very real topics that we need to continue to address. And so thank you for that, Cindy. Carla, what about the Native American communities? What's happening there?
Well, I think that she had shared a lot of the similarities that we also see in Indian country. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that every single one of us knows someone who's been infected or someone who's passed away due to COVID. It's really difficult to imagine how many of our loved ones have passed away as a result of the complications of COVID-19. And for the Native population, our elders are held like they are a precious resource, just like our children. Our elders are the keepers of our culture and our traditions. And so losing our elders has been very hard for our communities. And we know that the numbers are more significant and disproportionately affecting our multicultural communities. And I know Cindy listed many of those, but getting sick from the vaccine, the loss of jobs, reduced hours, the lack of medical care, or losing your health insurance because you lost a job, or the inability to work remote. Like for us that are able to work remote, we're very fortunate, but those that have to go to work and they're working in very dangerous conditions, not working from home, or to pay the basic necessities like she had mentioned in childcare and virtual school. And so when I think of Indian country or just think of multicultural women, or the impact is like if you have less education, a less stable job, less wealth, and medical insurance is connected to your job, then you can see how COVID is not just a health emergency, it's a financial emergency for many people. But we also heard from Cindy talk about the mental health toll this has taken on. When I think of our Native communities, I think of historical trauma, the collective trauma, and our personal trauma. And I think of the trauma of virus going back in the history of smallpox. Our communities intentionally infected with smallpox. So can you imagine the fear of COVID-19? People have experienced stress, anxiety, fear, sadness, loneliness. And we know that fear and worry and stress are normal responses, right? Or to perceived threats or real threats, or when there's uncertainty or unknown. And we know that anxiety and depression is going to continue to get worse during these unusual times. So one of the things that I would share, Sue-Ann, is, let's show grace, let's show empathy, let's support each other on a whole nother level. And sometimes that means slowing down to help others, to keep up with the pace of change. With the stress of COVID, it gave space in professional spaces for people to retreat, giving them the grace and empathy, but let's bring them back. We need to support them, bring them back, and engage them. But I just wanted to share, I saw so many similarities from the Latino community and the Indigenous population too.
Thanks for sharing that. And by the way, I think too shared in the chat session, LULAC's website, in case you're interested in learning more. And then Carla, I'm going to ask the same thing for the Boys Girls Club America Native Services. We can provide that information there as well. Karen, what about from a small business perspective for AAPIs? This is significant across the country. especially in the Chinatowns? What are you hearing?
Well, a lot of Chinatowns, the restaurants are not doing well at all and have had to shut down. There's a, we talk about the similar issues that have gone on in all of the diverse populations and communities that are represented here today. We have another thing, we have a language thing as well, because we have many different languages, especially like if you even take the Chinese language, there's Mandarin and there's Cantonese, there's Vietnamese, they're all different. You can't have one with, you can't understand, Hindi, and that's in the same Asian American space as we are. But I think that one of the bigger things that we've been noticing is that a lot of folks think that Asian American and Pacific Islanders don't need a lot of help. That's what we hear a lot, that we're doing really well. And that's not the case. And I acclimate that to like actors. If you think every actor is like George Clooney, then everyone's awesome. But that's not really the case. You've got the George Clooney's and and all of the top actresses. And then you have those who are struggling actors, and it's just not the same. So they're not representative of the entirety. And so we've had a lot of language barriers. We have a lot of smaller stores, the restaurants, they don't speak English. They don't have computers. A lot of the things we apply for are online. A lot of the education is online. And as we are trying to capture everybody, I think that the biggest thing in businesses is that we're struggling with, and I have tried to explain, is there's a lot of money being allocated by corporations to Black and Latinx corporations, but we have been excluded, and that is just the way that it's been most recently. So I wanted to make sure that the corporations that do support minority organizations and say so also include Asian American and Pacific Islanders, because we do need help, and we're not all doing well.
Yes, absolutely. I think that the key is the desegregating of the data, desegregating of the various Asian population. You can't just put everybody in one bucket. I think that's another big lesson. Cecilia, how about you? What are you seeing from your perspective for the African American community?
It's definitely a ripple effect, right? And this is really a moment in time to realize how interconnected we all are. So what happens in one community absolutely has an impact on the other community. And so as I'm listening to everyone speak, I remember the report that came out in the middle of last year that said that 61% of Americans will completely liquidate their savings by the end of the year. That's assuming that they have a savings. And I remember at the beginning of COVID, while everyone was rushing out to stock up and to prepare, there were many people who could not do that because they had to wait until their paycheck. So when I think about the multicultural Black, Hispanic, Asian, Native American community, and again, the redefinition of what is essential. Essential is the frontline worker. And the average of frontline workers do not have a savings, do not have access to funds. And so we just see that hole getting deeper and that gap getting wider, right? And so when the schools decided we were going to move to remote learning, we knew that so many of our children were not prepared. They did not have much less the laptop or the tablet, the Wi-Fi capabilities. And so, I'm very concerned, as even though we, the vaccine is available, but as was mentioned, we know that there is a fear. And so I appreciate hearing Cindy speak about the misinformation being spread in the Latin and Hispanic community, but in the Black community, there's a fear of not trusting doctors, right? There's a medical a history of Black people being tested upon without their knowledge, will, or willingly participating. So that just reinforces the lack of wanting to participate in the vaccine process. So put all of these intersectional things together, it just deepens that ditch and widens that gap. So for the Black community, I'm very concerned. And then you layer the social injustice that's happening on top of it, right? So even from the point of wearing a mask and looking like you're up to something because you're in a mask. We all remember the story of the doctor who was going to volunteer. He was in a hoodie and a mask, and the police were called because he looked threatening. And meanwhile, this man is a surgeon. And so when I think about the Black community, I think about so many things, from access to fair to the lower pay gap, right? And in the overall community. And then you add other intersectionalities, not just the Black community, but Black women. Right. And so I'm very concerned with where we go from here if we don't put programs and policies in place that care for the least of us.
Cindy and Cecilia, I think one of the things that you bring up that's very important is that what you're talking about is there's a lot of commonality as we talk about what are things common across all the different cultures, ethnicities. Let me share with all of you the Institute of Women's Policy Research that released a powerful new national poll of women across the country about what are the priorities for women and their family. And this was just released on February 24th. And the top 5 concerns were around healthcare, not to mention the emotional and mental toll that women are feeling, economic recession, unemployment, raising the minimum wage, and taxes. And the fact that this whole issue about financial stability is a major concern when women are stepping back from the workforce because of childcare issues and taking care of their family, whether it's their children or the elders, very, very important. So let me give you each of you a couple of minutes. What do we do? Where do we go from here? So let me start off. I'm going to go in reverse a little bit. Cecilia, where do we go from here to your question? What can we do that would be helpful to get through this pandemic together?
Yeah, one is to realize that we are all interconnected. So no culture is an island in and of itself. And so as we think about what are the practices and policies that we need to put into effect, know that it's going to have a ripple effect on all of us. So what we can do is not only hold the corporate responsible, right? And so when I think about the work that we're doing at L'Oreal, we're focused on not only just thinking about the consumer, but thinking about the communities in which we serve as well. So having a philanthropic effort that is relevant, real, and has tremendous impact. That's one aspect. So as a consumer, and most consumers are going to be smart right now with their dollar, and I'm going to spend my money with the companies that value me and support the causes that matter to me, from whether it's social justice or equal rights or so forth. The other pieces, and I'm so happy that we started the conversation with our lovely senator. The other piece is holding our people in leadership accountable. So it's not just a platform that you ran on in order to win the election. Now that you're in office, what do you do to service your constituents? And so it's really important that we stay focused, not only on the year where there is an election, but constantly.
So Cecilia, the accountability is huge, and representation matters, and the values Absolutely. That we hold, and making sure that the organizations that we're spending money on, that our values align.
Value me, and not only value my dollar, but value me.
Absolutely. All right, Karen, your thoughts about what can we do moving forward?
I think things like this, if you take this for example, you have very powerful women right here doing amazing things in the community for their race, as well as being sensitive to everything else that's going on with everybody else. I mean, they kept saying that, COVID doesn't discriminate. But the after effects of what that means, of the social injustice or the financial or racial gap, the wealth gap, all that stuff kind of comes into play and gets illuminated in this. I mean, I would tend to believe that if I said, hey girls, let's go, let's do this, we can do this, and every part of our communities can do something for each other and be impactful within our communities and to help each other, I think it speaks in volumes, right? I think that that is how you do that with collaboration and the relationships.
And Karen, that's one of the reasons why we are doing this with the cohorts that we have in this conference, because of exactly what you're talking about. We're going to accomplish more when we do it together because of the power of the women that are right here. So, and I encourage all of you to do something together, because one person can make a difference, right? So with that, what about Carla?
All right, I'll make this really brief, but I believe that through our collective strengths as multicultural women, we can support each other through empowerment, mentorship, improve outcomes for generations to come, and inspire our next multicultural women leaders. So I think Karen echoed the same thing, is that we need to continue to be warriors, be a voice, empower other women, and support them, right? Sue Ann, I see the hands go up, but continue to empower the next generation of multicultural women leaders and never let up. Be a voice.
That's phenomenal. And you know that in the Kapow world, we call those warrior sisters, the Apolli Fellows. So that is exactly what you're talking about. All right, Cindy.
So I would say 4 things. 1, let's shift the narrative. And, one thing is that words are powerful. My abuelita, my grandmother, always in the same sentence used to call me her little princess and her warrior. And so understanding the power of words is very important, and that we ourselves are passing on that legacy of our ancestors, and the strength that comes from our community is really important. And when people challenge me, no, I am not stubborn, I am assertive, and I am persistent. And so, understanding the powerful narratives that we build, I think it's really important. I would say the other one is policy, equal pay, right? Let's really focus on equal pay. Latinas get paid 53 cents to what a Caucasian male makes doing the same exact job. And we know that when we empower women, we empower the world. And just imagine if women were paid in parity to their Caucasian male counterparts, how different this world would be. I would say representation absolutely matters. And if you have never been asked, and maybe your parents never said, when you grow up, I hope that you become a politician. I hope that so many more of us become politicians, that we run for office, that we have more Senator Changs who are representing us at the table, who are speaking our truths and our journeys, and who are uplifting everything that we go through, because our journeys are so very unique. Yes, they're interconnected. And I think that is the beauty of being able to, we ourselves with our own voice and our own narratives, be at that table speaking the truth and the light that is our community. And then lastly, and I learned this while going to Virginia State University, I had the privilege to attend a historical Black college. And I remember that Professor Baker used to question us as students, and he would ask us, who comes and sits at your dinner table? All of our progressive students, and question, who do you open your door to in your own home? And does that reflect the diversity of America? And so I would say point 4, it's let's take a step back, we ourselves as individuals, and understand that we all have unconscious biases, and that for us to grow, we must also question ourselves to understand what our part is in America. And so just, a big thank you to everyone. And absolutely, if you've never been asked to run for office, I'm asking you, run for office. We need you in this struggle, in this fight. We need more Latinas, more African-American, more Native American, more AAPI, more Muslim women, more young people running for office and being that voice for us at the table.
Whoa, I feel like we all need to stand up and clap. So that was such an inspiring way to end this conversation. I think, first of all, thank you so much to the panelists who individually are inspiring, but collectively are a force to be reckoned with. So I'm thinking that we might have to come together as a panel and solve some world problems here. I think we can do this. So with that, we are going to, first of all, I want to thank our sponsors again for this amazing, for supporting us in this amazing conference. AARP, Comcast, NBC Universal, AT&T, and Walmart. APIA Scholars and National ACE really support that community partnership. And I want to thank all of the panelists for taking the time and showing your passion and showing the glimpse of what you're dealing with on a daily basis and keeping things real. So thank you so much for that. So next upcoming, we have another panel, Invisible to Visible, coming up. It's going to be moderated by Tu Nguyen. And we are very excited to go to that next segment. But before that, there's a quick survey that we want you to fill out to talk about the panelists and what you heard and just give us some feedback. So we appreciate that. And remember, tomorrow and Thursday night, mocktail mentoring time, where you get to look at, interact with amazing mentors sponsored by the APIA Scholars Group. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great night. And hopefully I'll see you in the next 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Bye.